I am live. I am continuing reading Lord of the Horizon. It is a Joan Marshall Grant far memory book about her life as Ra-Ab in ancient Egypt. We know Ra-Ab already from the Eyes of Horus, which was a rebellion group, and they won. And Ra-Ab is the nomarch of the Oryx. And we are now here in chapter 9, Seed of the Earth. Although the birth of Amenemhet had been so easy for Mary, I grew apprehensive as the time for her second ordeal drew near. She laughed at me when I voiced my fears and said that I should have received sufficient proof that she was skilled in such matters. "I believe you are seeing yourself as Amenemhet," she said. "With a dead wife he is convinced he murdered." "Don't say that, Mary, even in jest." "Then don't think it, when you know you are a fool to do so. If I died, though I'm sure I'm not going to, it would only be because my time as Mary is finished. The baby would only be a coincidence, not a cause. And what a pleasant coincidence that I should die doing something useful, instead of through a pain which was productive only in death." "I know you are right. I wish Amenemhet could hear you talk like that." "It's a pity that lots of respectable husbands murder their wives," remarked Mary reflectively. "Do they?" "Oh yes, very seldom in the Oryx, but I expect they do in other parts of Egypt, and thousands of foreign wives are murdered every year." I had a mental picture of wives stampeding across the plains of Babylon, pursued by husbands who brandished dripping knives. I smiled. Isn't that rather a highly coloured account of family life among foreigners? "Oh, I don't mean that they murder them deliberately, though it's really just as deliberate as if the husband put poison in his wife's drinking cup, and it doesn't break any laws." No doubt my knowledge of foreign customs is deficient, but I think among most peoples you will find a rigid law against murder, even if it is done by mistake. "Nothing is ever done by mistake, as you know as well as I do. I have often heard you tell petitioners that every action has a motive, and every motive a cause. When I said that thousands of wives are murdered every year, I meant it, and they are, by having children they don't want. If your body says, 'Don't disturb me, I'm busy making a child,' and the soul says, 'Stop making it,' is it so surprising that the spirit desires strongly to leave a house where there is so much quarrelling? I want a child, and my body wants a child, and so do you and your body. So we have got nothing to worry about. When the baby is ready, it will be born. This time I will stay in bed as long as you like, for you will be with me. Instead of laying siege to the royal city, I shall be able to enjoy all the special privileges, and people will come to tell me how clever I've been, and will bring me presents, and there will be 3 days rejoicing throughout the Oryx. I think it's going to be a girl. Amenemhet said he wanted a sister, but if it is, isn't we can't have another later on, so it doesn't really matter." I tried to comfort myself with the memory of this conversation when, less than a month later, 7 days before the 4th anniversary of Amenemhet's birth, Mary woke me and announced that she thought the baby would be born during the morning. I had insisted that a healer priest and a priest of Manhat, as well as Jan, whose skill had already proved invaluable as for many women who had undergone difficult delivery, should be in the house in case they were needed. Mary said that their attendance was unnecessary, and that she only required the attention of the birth woman, who had assisted at the coming of so many babies, and who had been with her when Amenemhet was born. The birth chair, which had been used in our family for 4 generations, was brought into the room, and I tried not to look on it as an instrument of torture. Mary was very cheerful, but a little later she caught her breath whenever the pain clutched her. I realized that by showing my agony of mind, I was only adding to her burden, so I made a great effort to appear casual. "You don't mind me staying in here, do you?" I asked. "No, of course I don't. I hate you to go away. At least I would, unless it is horrid for you." "Nothing about you can ever be horrid, and if you send me away I'll fuss much more than if I were here. Are you sure I oughtn't to call Pata'aru or one of the others?" "Of course I'm sure. I'm getting on very well. Besides, the birth woman is waiting in the next room, and she will come when I call." Hadn't we better have her in now?" "No, Ra-Ab, please don't fuss. There's nothing she can do until the last minute, and unfortunately there are going to be lots more minutes before that one comes." The pain got worse after a time, but she still went on, talking unconcernedly. I held her hands, and when the spasms were at their height, the thin fingers dug into my palms. I wished that I believed, as do some of the primitive tribes of the far south, that by slashing my body with a knife and rubbing salt into the wound, I could take upon myself some of her pain. But I was unable to have even this meager consolation. "Dear Ra-Ab, you look as though you were having 3 babies covered with spines instead of me having only 1. We shall have to add some more rooms to the temple when fathers can be attended while their wives are in labor." Her face glistened with sweat, although the room was not too warm. Her words came in gasps, as though she had been running a long way. "I don't think we'll have to wait much longer. It seems to be a very impatient baby. I think I'd better go over to the chair. You can call the birth woman now." I shouted for her, and she came running. "You'd better wait outside," said the birth woman firmly. "There's nothing more you can do, and you'll only get in the way." I started to tell her that nothing would induce me to leave my wife, but Mary smiled and said, "You go and tell Niam that the baby will be ready for her in a minute, and don't come back till I call you. I shan't be long." I found Niam waiting in the anteroom. She brushed past me and went into Mary's room. In an agony of indecision, I walked up and down outside the door. Did Mary really want me to stay outside, or was she trying to save my feelings? Was I betraying her by staying away, or would it only make things more difficult if I went back? I prayed to all the gods in turn, so vehemently that I think the fields of Ra must have resounded with my pleas. I heard a shrill wailing, and for a moment I thought that Mary's magnificent courage had at last been forced to bow to pain. Then, with a surge of unspeakable relief, I recognized it as the yelling of a newborn, and apparently extremely vigorous child. I realized that in the pillared hall at the end of the anteroom were people who were also waiting for news. I went up and put my arm around his shoulders. "It's all right, Father. The baby is born. It must be all right. It has such a loud voice." "How is Oya? How is Mary?" And I realized that for a moment he had slipped back to Kia's birth, and that he was asking for Oyabe. I concealed the agitation the absent-minded word had aroused, for Oyabe had died soon after Kia's was born. At the door of Mary's room I met Niam, carrying the baby in her arms. "It's a daughter," she said proudly, "and every bit as fine as her brother was." "How is my wife?" She had it as easy as though she had worked in the fields all her life. "Don't go in till they're finished clearing up in there. She's back in her bed already, but she wants them to finish washing her before you see her." I didn't have to wait very long. Mary was pale, and her body looked very long and flat. Otherwise she showed no sign of the terrible hours through which she had just passed. "Dear Ra-Ab, I feel so happy, and I've been so clever. It's a girl. Aren't you sorry you didn't believe me when I told you not to fuss? Having a baby is nothing at all when you are good at it, as I am." "Nothing at all? Ra-Ab, what's the matter with you? You look absolutely exhausted. You aren't ill and hiding it from me, are you?" Her voice was sharp with anxiety. I began to laugh, and she joined in. "I am not ill," I said. "I only look tired because I'm not so good at having babies as you are. We called our daughter Becket, and Amenemhet soon became as devoted to her as I had been to Kias. When she grew old enough to be able to crawl, Amenemhet always went on his hands and knees when he was playing with her, for he said it was unfair for us to pretend to be superior just because we could stand. Becket had very decided opinions of her own, and if people were too stupid to understand what she wanted, she would yell until they were forced to bring sufficient attention to solve her problem. One day, hearing delighted chuckles coming from the nursery, I went in to find her patting a young rat, which Amenemhet had just given to her. "You had better take that rat away from her before Niam sees it," I said. "It was silly of you to give it to her. She might have been bitten." "I didn't mean to give it to her. I brought it in here because I thought she'd like to see it, and it jumped out of my hands and went to her by itself. She wasn't at all frightened, so I'm sure it won't bite her." I tried to pick up the rat, but Becket clutched it and howled. It cowered down beside her, seeking protection, but as she stroked it, gradually lost its fear. "She'd let me take it away if I promised to bring it back tomorrow," said Amenemhet. "She always understands what I say, even though she can't talk properly yet. She likes animals better than humans, because they can speak the language which doesn't need words. I often bring her animals to play with. Yesterday it was a beetle, and the day before it was a baby frog. Don't tell Niam, though, will you? She'll only be cross." It seems that 20 years had vanished, and I was hearing myself say, "Don't tell Niam." I wonder if Becket will lead you into adventures, as Kias used to lead me. "It will be very exciting when she is old enough for adventures. She'll be able to learn to swim soon, won't she? I should think it would be easier than walking, and she is such a very good crawler." "Let's take her down to the pool and see. You carry the rat and I carry Becket." Mary had had a shallow pool made for the children, where they could sit in the water and splash as much as they liked. But this was the first time Becket had been in a large swimming pool. I supported her on my hand and let her rest on the water. She shouted with pleasure, and after Amenemhet had explained to her in their private language, she began to kick her arms and legs like a frog. After a while I put her down to dry in the sun on the warm stones, while Amenemhet showed me how much his diving had improved since the day before. I heard Mary's voice in conversation with Royden, who was staying with us, and they came through the opening in the white wall which led from the garden, where they had been sowing seeds that Royden had brought from Hotep Ra. Mary was laughing and looked very young. She saw Becket and cried out, "Quick, Ra-Ab, there's a rat attacking her." Amenemhet scrambled out of the pool and ran to his mother. "It's not an attacking rat, it's a tame rat, and she loves it. Don't frighten it, or it might run away." "Are you sure it's safe, Ra-Ab?" asked Mary anxiously. "Quite sure, but if you're worried, I'll tell Amenemhet to take it away from her." "I'm not worried, but perhaps Amenemhet had better take it. Anyway, it's time for Becket to have her milk, and Niam will be waiting for her." Becket decided to accept this interruption amiably, and Mary took her off towards the house while Amenemhet walked beside them, carrying his rat. Royden joined me in the water, and after swimming for a few minutes, we lay in the sun to bask. "Your daughter is a remarkable child, Ra-Ab," he said with a smile. "Watchers seem to make excellent parents, for Hanuk's children are as exceptional as your own. I wonder who will become Lord of the Horizon at my death." "No, I don't think I shall die soon, but I hope that before my work is finished there will be someone ready to take over my particular authority. That is why I have not yet appointed my heir, for the one whom I shall recognize as my son in Horus needs not be linked to me by blood. Do you think Amenemhet will be a priest? By the time he is 7 years old, our priest of Ma'at will tell you whether it has had any previous temple training. In any case, I should not advise you to send him to a temple, for as the future Nomad, he already has a great heritage. Perhaps it will be one of Hanuk's daughters, or Becket, or a child not yet born. The gods will send my successor in their own time, and I do not feel undue curiosity as to their plans. It must be strange for people who do not think as we do, Royden, to find they have so little influence in the shaping of their children's ways of life. Armenia and Becket are both born of love, brought up in the same surroundings and by the same ethic, yet there is no reason why they should have any resemblance of character. In recognizing that you may save yourself much future anxiety, I fear that I showed very little understanding of my daughter. Only a year separated her from Hanuk, yet they were almost strangers. She married a man whom I thought exceedingly dull, yet he has succeeded in bringing her great contentment. He sat up, wrung the water from his dripping hair, and went on. Sometimes I receive parcels of seed from a man whom I once befriended, and who now lives in the land of gold. He sends them to me because he knows that I have always taken great pleasure in my garden, but he is not a methodical man, and he never remembers to separate the seeds into varieties, nor does he tell me from what plant they were collected. All I can do is to sow them in what I hope is a suitable soil, but until I have learned their peculiarities, some suffer because I water them too much, and others because I water them too little. Some have to grow in the shade when they would prefer the full sun, and others wilt because the direct rays are too strong for their tender shoots. Fortunately, I have some experience as a gardener, so while my plants are still young, I can usually make an accurate guess as to where they should be transplanted and what conditions they require for their flowers to reach perfection. That is all a father can do, to try to provide the right soil in which his seed can reach maturity. But he must be ever watchful that the plant receives the treatment it requires. Our seed also is from a foreign country, from the land of Ra. We must not think of ourselves as a sycamore, which knows that from its seeds another sycamore will grow. For we have lost the need for that continuity, and we must always remember that from the loins of a most ordinary man may be born a child who is worthy to be Pharaoh, and that from a man who is venerated for his wisdom may come forth a fool. So that was chapter 9. Next chapter 10 is Sanctuary, and I'll read that soon.